drawing from concealment. It's something that we talk about often, but do we do it enough? Do we train it enough? That's the problem with many things. Our intentions are true, but look, we're working everyday people, right? I'm an average everyday guy. I'm not, again, some guy that's paratrooping out of helicopters, and I'm not kicking doors in. I'm not a SWAT guy. I'm an average everyday guy, blue collar guy that works for a living. A lot of times we intend to do the right things as far as training with our firearms and our weapons in order to protect ourselves and our family, but we don't always do it either because of time, scheduling, or family. Sometimes family gets in the way, and guess what? Life gets in the way of life sometimes, which means life gets in the way of training sometimes. Today we're going to talk about some quick, effective drills that you can do to prepare for drawing from concealment. All right, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unload my pistol. As you saw, I was shooting on a live range with live ammunition. Now I want to practice with a safe weapon in a controlled environment. Many cases, a lot of the types of training that we can do, including drawing from concealment, is going to be something that you can definitely do at home to hone those skills and to start to develop that muscle memory. At some point, yes, you want to bring your whole routine out here to the gun range and utilize live fire. But since we're dealing with muscle memory, what we don't want to do is have poor muscle memory or no control and be practicing with those live rounds when we're talking about pulling a loaded weapon from concealment under our clothes right next to our body. Because the worst thing that could happen is we fumble through it, we try to impress ourselves, or we try to get a better time, and we put a round right through our bottom side or our leg. We don't want that. A couple of rules that I like to live by when it comes to drawing from concealment. Number one, waste as little movement as possible. You'll notice that a lot of times when people are trying to draw, they employ a whole lot more movement than what's necessary, which means they're wasting energy and they're wasting time. So that's rule number one. I try to waste as little energy as possible and as little movement as possible whenever I'm trying to deploy my weapon and present it to my target. My rule number two is go as slow as you need to be effectively fast. If that doesn't make sense, what I'm saying is you slow everything down to where the goal that you have, the end goal, is to always hit what you're shooting at. If you are super fast and you miss your target, then that speed did you no good if that other person is shooting or attacking or stabbing you at that point. But if you can be slow enough to still meet your end goal and put a bullet on that target, on that threat, then you've accomplished everything. No one is impressed with your speed if you miss the shot. So going into detail about the wasted movement, let's talk about this. A lot of people who have not put in enough training time or who have just not had enough advice, and quite frankly, who have not done it in front of a mirror. I know we're not practicing to be rock stars where you're posing with your guitar in front of the mirror to see what your stage moves are going to be like. When you look at yourself in the mirror or even videotape yourself, you're going to spot a lot of things a lot more objectively than you would if you were just doing it and not looking at yourself. A lot of times people with golf swings don't realize that they're doing all this awful stuff until they either see the video of themselves or obviously watch somebody else doing it incorrectly and apply that to themselves. Same applies here. Most people that you see wasting movement, they're doing a couple of things, okay? They are trying to, when they're trying, and we're gonna assume we're dealing with right-handed shooters here, okay? Most people, you'll notice whenever they go to draw, and we're not even talking about concealment at this point, when they go to draw, they'll dip that left shoulder and they'll go to raise that right shoulder and they'll twist those hips and they'll go like this. Now, a couple of things that's very wrong with that. You're putting so many things out of place that have to go back into place before you can effectively put that shot on target. So you have to readjust and realign everything and put it all back the way it started in order to actually shoot the gun. So that's one of the worst things. The second thing is I find that whenever you do that, you're chasing your gun. What I mean by that is if you are dipping that left shoulder, turning and pulling that right shoulder back, and let me do this from the side so you can see it better. If you're, again, dipping that left shoulder and pulling that right shoulder, notice, let me just show you, uncover my gun here, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Notice the position of my gun. Notice it does not stay right here as I move my body. As I'm moving my shoulders and my hands and my arms and basically everything at this point, I'm moving everything incorrectly. The gun's running away from me. So I'm chasing the gun with my right hand. Okay, so if I'm going to engage a threat, watch the gun and watch my hand. Notice how whenever I dip that shoulder, that gun is moving. That gun's moving farther away. The more I twist my hips, the more I'm having to follow it with my hand. How do we fix that? Let me tell you, the best way to practice drawing, and again, let's do this dry firing at home. Again, we are empty right here. Let me show you here. The best way to practice this draw is not to move your feet or your hips. Let your hips stay directly in line with your feet. They should not turn at all. Again, this, to use a golf analogy, this is not a golf swing. We're not trying to pivot at the hips. We want our hips to stay straight, stay square with our target, and stay right on top of our feet. That way, all we're moving at this point and not dipping, we're wanting to keep our shoulders level. We don't want our shoulders going any way like this. Now, they may dip a little bit naturally just because of the way we move, but the intent is to try to keep them as level as possible. So our next move is going to be, if our hands are at our side, of course, this hand is going to move over because we're trying to uncover, and we'll get more into that here in a second. But as far as where your shoulders go, this hand is going to uncover, so it's spinning. In other words, it's not dipping. I'm not doing this to uncover my shirt. I'm simply moving my arm over. So you notice my shoulders don't even move. This shoulder, instead of rising up and chasing the gun, now this hand's here, my right arm is simply coming backwards. We don't want to chicken wing it, put it out there. We're simply doing like this, getting hold of that gun, unholstering it, and then we're bringing that thing forward and pushing it out to our target. All I'm going to do, notice how little movement I waste. So instead of chasing my target, two things you chase when you have all that wasted movement. You're chasing the gun over here, and then you're chasing your sights to try to get back on target. You're having to correct everything. Whenever I exaggerate and do the movement wrong, notice all the things that are out of place. Okay, I'm back here. You know what all I have to do? Now I have to straighten my left knee back out. I have to get my right leg back in place. I have to move both hips back into place. I have to now, instead of this left shoulder being down, I have to now get my shoulders not only back level again, but straight with my target. And then guess what? The only thing I did have to correct on my other way was my hands. I still have to get my hands on target. My head is not even ready. Notice the position of my head, okay? If I'm going to exaggerate and make all the movements that are incorrect, notice where my head is right now, and notice where it is now. Turned and to the side, and low. And now I have to get back on target. If I keep everything in place where it goes, again, note the position of my head. Of course, I'm not going to be able to draw it now, but my position of my head stays the same. Why is it so critical that my head stays in the same place? Because my eyes are attached. My eyes are part of my head. So now I don't have to move my head to get in position, because when you're all out of position, you're putting your gun in position where you think it's supposed to be, but now your head and your eyes have to find that gun and then find the sights. So it's so critical if we can just keep a post straight up and realize that we don't need to turn to either side. We want to keep our spine straight up and down. We're rotating on that axis. That's all we're doing, is we're rotating on that axis. Slow is fast. You've heard that, right? It's absolutely true. Again, I want to repeat that if you're engaging an actual threat, and your intent should be, but if your intent is to hit that threat before he hits you or attacks you, there's no points for style at this point. It's all winner. It's winner takes all at this point. You got to hit him. He doesn't care how fast or slow you do it. So if I try to impress him by being all out of whack and trying to be fast and whipping my gun around and then shooting at him, if I miss him by 5 feet, he's closed that gap and he's on top of me. The ultimate goal is to put that person horizontal in front of you. That's the goal when someone is attacking you and your family. So again, I want to stress, let's practice this as slow as we can. Practice it as slow as you can. Again, make sure your gun is empty. And whether it's holstered or, covered and concealed or not, I like to practice concealed. But that throws a wrinkle in there because you have to be careful when you are trying to draw from concealment. Again, not trying to do it with speed. That's why you want to start this at home first before having a loaded weapon. But you have to watch out that you don't go down and accidentally grab your shirt and go to pull the firearm out, and you're still lifting here, and you sling that firearm out of your hand, and it goes flying with a live round in it. That's some things you got to be very, very careful of. So again, I recommend, and this is not an exaggeration, I recommend 100 or 200 dry fire shots at home. Then your body's going to start to remember. And then even after that, I would practice your draw outside waistband, or at least not concealed at that point. Because again, that draw is not going to have that shirt or that garment getting in the way. You only want to practice with this concealed garment when you're absolutely ready, because so many things can happen. Again, you can pull down on top of it. No matter what you do, you never want to get your garment in between your hand and your gun. That's a big no-no. And on top of that, I've noticed one thing. Some of these newer holsters that have this piece on the back of it that will tuck that holster against your body, you got to practice with those, guys. If you're going to carry with that, make sure you're practicing with it. I actually had one on when I came out here, and one thing that I noticed was that it really pushes your gun off to the side. This was the first time I'd worn this holster. Even though I had practiced with this particular gun many times, this is the first time that I had worn this one. And I noticed that whenever I went to draw it, because I was going to use it in this video, the handle was not at the angle that I was so used to. All the practice that I had done, now simply changing my holster had changed all of my practice because of muscle memory, which is a good thing. But I went to the place where I expected my gun to be, and it wasn't there. I could not get my thumb where it needed to be. It was actually wrapped more against my body. That's very, very important. That is such a critical point of training, is that if you change anything in your equipment, you gotta train with that stuff so that you develop that muscle memory. And this was a total mistake on my part, because I wasn't even thinking that that slight inch or two off was going to make that big of a difference, but it totally did. Again, I went there and there was nothing there. There was not what I expected to be in the place I expected it to be. So folks, when you're practicing at home, do everything, accent it slowly. It's no different than if you're practicing guitar or piano, where you learn where all the notes are slowly and you gradually speed that up until you actually get good and efficient at it. Same thing here, guys. You don't always have to go bang, and I'll tell you why. You don't want to condition yourself to always pulling the trigger at the end of your draw, because not every time that you actually extend that gun are you going to pull the trigger. You may be actually presenting that gun to a threat, and you disable that threat just from the sheer fact that you drew a gun and presented it to him. Now he's probably no longer a threat. He may have dropped his gun. No criminal wants to have some hot lead loaded into him. So very many times I will end with a trigger press, but you want to practice more without a trigger press so that it's not just a common muscle memory thing. Now, one thing that I recommend also, especially whenever you bring yourself out to the range and start working with this live fire, when you put live ammo in this, the rules change, guys. Now we're talking about hospital stay, or worse, a little nap in a coffin if you do things wrong, okay? Too much stuff down here can get hit and bleed you out, and nobody's going to be able to find you until you're pale, very pale. You want to make sure that when you're reholstering, you get used to where your holster is. Don't try to be like these tactical Tommies and just slam your holster in there. Look. Make sure you are making a positive insertion after you have drawn that weapon. Your weapon should not be in your holster if there's still a threat downrange, right? So I don't need to keep my eyes on the threat. And I know a lot of the tactical guys out there, the trainers, are probably going to get really angry at me for saying this, but I'm not putting my pistol back into my holster if that threat is still a threat down there. It's not going in there. So I have no reason to try to holster while I'm still looking at the threat. If he's laying horizontal and he's down there, then I feel the need to put my gun in my holster, and I'm going to follow with my eyes. Because the last thing I need to do is to have just successfully defended myself, and now I shoot myself in the foot, and I'm just as horizontal as this guy that was trying to attack me or my family. Folks, the takeaway from this is very, very simple. You want to make sure that your end goal is, if you are drawing your weapon, there is a threat. If there is a threat, you want him laying on the ground before you do. So we have to make sure that we waste as little movement as possible so that we're being able to be as slow as we necessarily need to be fast. And by not wasting that movement, we're cutting out a lot of steps in between that are wasted and taking up time. So now you have more time to do what you need to do because you haven't wasted all that excess movement. Very, very important. Guys, there's a lot of folks out there that seek to do us harm. And it's very important that we see that and we train accordingly. Because I can promise you this, I come out to these ranges a lot. You know who I don't see practicing out here? The kind of people that want to do you and me and our families harm. So we can keep that leg up on them and make sure that we are not victims. We want to keep our victim status at 0 And this is one very effective way to do it. Shoot straight and be safe, guys.